Welcome to our Daily Bread. Today we're going to make bread on our Daily Bread. I'm not usually a baker, but we're going to start with some very easy bread today. We're going to make some lemon soup, lemon chicken, that'll be good. And then we're going to make some, just a very simple salad for our guest today. Now, today we're going to be talking about human trafficking. It's a really very heavy and serious subject and something that we're really concerned about. All people of goodwill, but particularly church people, are trying to address the problem of human trafficking. And I want to talk about that with our guest today, who'll be joining us a little bit later, who's kind of an expert on that. But right now I'm going to start with our bread. Now this is one of the simplest bread recipes. Everybody knows it. You can find it on the internet all over the place. And it was a recipe that was made popular maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and it went in the New York Times. It's the New York Times no-knead quick bread recipe. You use all-purpose flour, 3 cups of it. Now, you can use whole wheat flour, but you'll get a much denser loaf. And that's what I used. I made one with 3 cups of the whole wheat flour. But this one I'm going to mix up a little bit. I'm going to put 2 cups of all-purpose and 1 cup of whole wheat flour in here. And 1 packet of active dry yeast. Whoops, we don't want the top of the packet in there, okay. And about almost 2 cups of hot water, not hot, warm water, because if it's too hot, it'll kill the yeast. If it's not hot enough, it will not activate the yeast. So we want about 2 cups of water. And I'm going to just use, you don't even have to touch it right now. You're just going to put a little water there with my wooden spoon. Okay. Now, as I said, this is a very simple bread recipe, but it takes about a day to make because it's you just wait. You're going to wait for it. And so it's good to do this at night, in the evening perhaps, just a little bit of salt in there. I'm using some kosher salt. Mix it up. See, it looks a little watery, but that's okay. There we go. And that's all there is to this part of it. You're going to cover this with a towel. And this is where the waiting comes in, and you set it in a warm place. By warm, I mean about 70, 75 degrees, basically, warm room temperature for about 12 hours, okay, 12 hours. Thousands of people are taken against their will every year throughout the world in what's called human trafficking. Think of it as modern-day slavery, When we say slavery, very vivid images probably come into your mind. You think of slavery in the United States with the Africans who were brought over and enslaved to do the work here in the 19th century. You may think of the slavery of the Israelites in Egypt and how they finally escaped the claws and the clutches of the Pharaoh. So there's been human trafficking and human slavery from the beginning of time, but we don't think of it today. We think, well, we're a civilized world. And no. And it's not just in far-off lands that there's human trafficking. It's all over the place. It's even in, where I live, in Western New York. It's even not as prevalent in the city as it is in the suburbs. A couple of years ago, we had the U.S. Attorney for our local district, Bill Hochul, was here giving a talk at our parish, and he was telling us how serious this problem is. And many people think of it, it's probably just people who are from foreign countries, or it's just in the city. Well, it happens there too. But it happens in outlying areas, in suburbs, in communities that are pretty homogeneous, So it's happening around us, and we're going to learn more about that as the show progresses today. And by the way, I mentioned we're going to let this bread sit for 12 hours, 70 degrees. It's going to rise up a little bit. Then after it rises up, after 12 hours, you're going to scoop it around, put a little flour in there, turn it over a couple of times, not really knead it, just turn it over a couple of times. Put it back in there and let it set for another hour or 2 hours to rise again. Bread rises again. It reminds us of the resurrection, right? Now, this is very, very hot, so be careful. Okay. Now what you're going to do is you're going to get a Dutch oven, a Pyrex dish, perhaps. Anything that will withstand, I like to use the cast iron covered with enamel. You want to use this to bake your bread in. And what you're going to do is you're going to put your vessel, your bowl, your cooking utensil, your Dutch oven, you're going to put that in the oven at 450 degrees. And while you're doing that, you're going to turn the dough out, push it a couple of times in on itself, and then I'm going to put a little olive oil over the bread, put it seam side down in this 450 degree pan, which we will take out of the oven, and very carefully, because it's very hot, and then put the bread in, and it will start to bake. You're going to cover it for the first 30 minutes or so, okay? And then we uncover it, still at 450 degrees, for the last 30 minutes or so, okay? Just watch it. When it gets browned and rises up, it'll be just right. Now, as I said, if you make this with all-purpose white flour, it'll get crustier and it'll get a little bit lighter than the bread that I made. I made it with all wheat flour, and it doesn't rise quite as much, but it is really a very rustic loaf of bread. Now, let me just kind of dump this out here. All right. You hear that? Huh? They're nice and crusty. It's always nice to be able to share a meal and especially talk about some of the important issues. And bread and soup are pretty basic, aren't they, to human need? Again, it's a little denser. It doesn't have as many holes in it as it would, and it's not as doesn't rise up quite as much as it does with the all-purpose flour. But it's really a really very tasty bread here. And it's terrific with a little bit of, butter or even a little olive oil is really great. That bread has a real strong wheaty flavor. It's a very, very nice bread. Hope you like it. Now, we're going to be back with the real substance of the program, this human trafficking, learn some more about this terrible, devastating difficulty and problem and sin, really, in our world. And we'll be back right after this. Welcome back to our Daily Bread, where today we're talking about a very serious and difficult subject, human trafficking. Joining me today is Tata Hughes from the International Institute. Tara, you're slicing up some very thin, a couple of stalks of celery. We're going to make some soup called avogolemeno. I think that's how you say it. It's kind of a Greek soup, but it's my version of this lemon chicken soup. And anyway, we'll talk about that. But first of all, you're from the International Institute.
I am.
And
yes.
Tell us a little bit. The International Institute, I remember as a high school kid, and I remember it because there were interpreters there when there were not a lot of people who knew different languages in Western New York.
Right.
You could always go to the International Institute to find someone.
Right.
When did the Institute begin, and basically what was its purpose?
It began in the early 1900s, and it was originally a refugee resettlement place and including interpreters and translation, which is the written translation of words. And so we've been around for a long time, and we continue to do that. We have a large refugee resettlement program. We have language programs, and we also have education programs and job training programs, in addition to the department that I work in, which is the Survivor Support Department.
We're going to talk a little bit about, a lot about human trafficking, but as we do that, I'm going to put a heavy pan on the fire on low, and I'm going to put in about 2 tablespoons of butter. There we go. And about the same amount, about 2 tablespoons of flour. Now, I like to put some celery in, which you've sliced up a couple of stalks of very finely chopped. In fact, could you just do a little chop, more chop on that? And I'm going to also very finely chop this shallot. And these are going to go in with the flour and the butter. And we're going to start right when the flour and the butter is melting together. First of all, What is human trafficking?
So human trafficking is the exploitation of a human for personal gain.
Okay.
And that exploitation can happen in any number of ways. There's both really two divisions of human trafficking. One is labor trafficking, and that encompasses most of the things that would go under the Department of Labor, any kind of job that you would have, working in a field, working in a restaurant, those kinds of things. But then also there's commercial sex trafficking. And so they divide them, but generally the definition is the same. And that definition has three components that we always look for and that we always need to use when we talk with our partners, law enforcement and prosecution partners. As part of our task force, we're often working with a very large group of people, partners. So we look for how someone got brought into the situation they're in. Generally, there's recruitment of some dimension. There's one of the slight misconceptions about human trafficking is that people are often kidnapped and brought in, and usually the recruitment is a much more slow process. There's a lot of grooming that goes along with it.
Right. Let me ask you about that in a second, but let me throw these in real fast.
Yep.
I don't want them to get our butter to get too brown here. So our little shallot's going to add a little flavor, and we got our celery. Thank you. I'm going to put in about 6 liquid cups of low sodium or no sodium chicken broth. And we're going to cover that in a few minutes, and we're going to let that come up to a boil. Now, Tara, we were talking about grooming people.
Sometimes the grooming process is really about how people are getting into the situation. So in some cases, in foreign countries, people will go and offer what looks like a really great deal. They'll go to a small village where there's not a lot of jobs, and they'll offer people $100 a week, and they'll offer
if they come to the
United States, and they do what is being asked of them, they will
make a good sell.
Make a good sell. They'll be able to send money back to their country of origin. They'll be able to take care of their families. And generally, then they come here, and what they were promised is not what actually happens.
What actually happens?
Well, there's a number of things. And that actually gets us into the second component of trafficking. So how people get there is one of those components. The second is how they're kept there. And they're kept there really by one of 3 mechanisms, either force or fraud or coercion. The trafficker will take all of their identity documents. They'll take their passport. They sort of keep it and say they're holding it for safekeeping.
I see.
Generally destroy it, because it's much harder to run from someplace if you don't have your identity documents. And if someone is then telling you that as soon as you walk out the door, you're going to be deported because you don't have documentation.
Right.
So that's one of the things that can happen with people who are foreign-born. The force is really what it sounds like, violence or threats of violence, but it's not just to that person, it's often to the family as well. And those threats...
The family back home?
Family back home, but again, we're talking about a lot of human trafficking that's happening right here in Western New York.
Well, that's the thing, too. Now, Bill Hochul gave an example of someone taking local people over state lines for sexual purposes. That would be human trafficking too?
They actually don't have to go over state lines. They just have to be exploited. And then it is indeed human trafficking.
I see. Okay.
So we have people who are trafficked right out of their own neighborhoods.
I'm just going to dump some orzo. It's a very little, it's just a tiny pasta, really. So a little orzo. And while that's cooking, now I've cut up very small some chicken breast. Probably 6 to 8 ounces is going to go in the soup. The star of the soup is really lemons. Do you like lemon?
I do like lemon.
Okay. I like a lot of lemon juice. I probably go a little bit overboard. But here, let's just... Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this lemon reamer to get all the juice out of these 2 lemons. Then I'm going to kind of pick out the seeds with a little spoon. And then what we do, we're going to thicken the soup with some eggs, 3 eggs. So, Tara, if you wouldn't mind, would you crack the 3 eggs that are there in there? And I'm going to turn their soup is really bubbling away, so I want to turn that down a little. Now remember, we put that little bit of flour in there. We put the pasta in, both which have starch, obviously, and those are going to be thickeners. But that's not all. We're going to use one more thickening thing, and we're going to use this our 2 lemons, and I'm going to put some eggs in there, or Tara has done that so beautifully. And I'm going to just whisk this together. Whoop. So here's what we do, okay? I'm going to get some of this hot soup, and if I just dump the eggs and the lemon juice into the pot, the eggs will scramble. So we don't want that. We want it to be smooth and creamy. So we're going to introduce a little bit of heat at a time so the eggs don't scramble. And what will happen is then, this will be again a thickener for our soup. What's your favorite type of salad dressing if you were going to choose a salad dressing?
Probably raspberry vinaigrette.
Oh, raspberry vinaigrette. Maybe we could make some. Do you ever make it? Or
I have made it.
What's your recipe like?
Out of a book, I can tell you that much.
Let's see. We're going to put a little bit of, just slowly put this into our soup. Okay. So I'm going to add a little salt and pepper. You should always taste your, always taste your soup or your food first. What I do in the kitchen, I usually have a couple of clean spoons around because, you don't want to double dip. Okay. Very lemony, very low salt, so we're going to put a little salt in to bring out some more of the flavor. A little bit of pepper, ground pepper. Okay, and here's my dried thyme. I'm going to make sure I take it off the little stalks here. Okay, I don't want these little stems, I should call them, in the soup, because that's not going to be good. Now we're going to let this simmer till it thickens a little bit. Then we'll have our soup. We've got our bread, and let's try to make a raspberry vinaigrette, huh? When we come back on our daily bread. Welcome back to our Daily Bread, where Tata Hughes has joined me from the International Institute, and we're talking today about human trafficking, a very serious problem that is not only around the world, but it's in our area of Western New York. It's in the city, but it's especially prevalent in the suburbs. Now, and we're also cooking a lot of things. We made some bread, we made some soup, some lemon soup, and now I'm going to compose a little bit of a salad for us. I'm going to try to make some kind of a raspberry vinaigrette, but it's going to be just off the top of the head. And we've got, what I first need to do too is I've got about, as I said, 6 to 8 ounces of cooked chicken, which I've cubed and sliced very small. That's going to go into our soup. That's a nice protein. In fact, this is something you can do even from a rotisserie chicken. That's what I did from the store, and look how beautiful that looks. Oh, it's coming along. We're going to just let that set for a few minutes. Now I'm going to put together the salad. I always use a salad spinner because you really want the lettuce to be dry. And it is. And it leaves a lot of water in the bottom of the thing there. There we go. And I'm going to put this here. And I'm going to put a little goat cheese in it. Do you like goat cheese or
Love
not?
Goat
Okay,
cheese.
perfect.
Love.
You want to open this and slice it into little rounds. And I'm going to do I've got some frozen berries here that I let sit out for a little while. I've got some olive oil, of course. I'm going to macerate these. And a little bit of white Italian vinegar. I'm going to put actually quite a bit more olive oil in here too. Let's see. Okay, and we got a little bit of Dijon mustard, a little bit of berry jam. And this is not raspberry. I would prefer that, but I didn't have any. So we've got raspberries and a little bit of another type of jam to give it a little sweetness. A little basil. Put a lot of basil. I got some tomatoes, little grape tomatoes that I've actually stuck with the tines of the fork and put a little olive oil and vinegar over these and let them set for a couple of hours to kind of absorb that. I think it gives it a nice little extra flavor. I think we'll be okay. I'm going to use this dressing very lightly, as a matter of fact. Now, we're just going to kind of compose our salad. We're going to put some asparagus, some cold cooked asparagus. Okay. And now, Tara, while I'm doing this, and I'm going to put sliced beets and pecans, and then we'll finish with the goat cheese on top as well. But Tara, if someone was interested in more information on this terrible problem, and I don't know what to call it, it's almost, I would call it a sin, really, for us, what would people do to kind of get more involved or to learn more information? Or what do you need from the people who might be watching who'd like to get involved?
It's hard to get people involved with our clients directly because of confidentiality
of course,
issues.
That makes absolute sense.
But what we need things, safety kinds of things like go phones, track phones, minutes on track phones, bus tokens, those kinds of things. New underwear of all sizes, undergarments of all dimensions are needed. Many of our survivors end up fleeing from a situation very quickly, and they can't take their belongings with them, so they come to us and they don't have anything.
What's the ratio of men? I just think of women as being
right.
In this,
so
it's men too, or?
What statistics tell us, if you look at the numbers, is that it's in sex trafficking, it's more women. In labor trafficking, it's really divided pretty evenly. But I will say with sex trafficking that I think it's an identification issue. I think it's happening across the board, males and females. But
men don't want to be...
I think the public doesn't necessarily want to see it with men. It's harder to identify. And so that's a problem that I think we all face, I think all service providers face. And I think that I know your audience is wider than Western New York, and I think that what is needed is pretty uniform in terms of survivors and what they end up needing. We have to think about safety, and we have to think about what they, just basic life needs, clothing, those kinds of things. And donations are really an important thing. There are times where we need to do something that none of us have ever thought of. And so if we have a pot of donation money that people have made directly to our program, then we can use that money to meet that need. So think about monetary donations, but then also some of those material things that we really need to have on hand.
So we've got our bread, our salad, our soup, which I'm looking forward to trying. Would you like to try a little of this?
Absolutely.
And what we're going to do, I want to thank Tara for being on the program today. And do you have a social media site that people would go to? Say that again.
The International Institute has a website. Under the International Institute of Buffalo.
Wonderful, great. And we're thankful to God, too, for Tara, the work she does, and the work so many people do to try to help people who are in this terrible human trafficking situation. We pray, loving Father, creator of us all, you made human life to be lifted up to the dignity of yourself. We thank you for the food, and we especially pray for those less fortunate than ourselves, those who may not have food today, and especially those who are going where they would not want to go, those who are enslaved in a way, those who are trafficked as human beings, that they may receive the freedom that you desire for all of your children as children of you, the Father. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Okay. So, do tell me, be honest, I can take it. It's lemony.
Very nice. It is lemony.
You like it? Lemony.
It is lemony.
All our recipes are at odbtv.org. If you subscribe to our Daybreak TV Productions channel on YouTube, too, so you can watch us anytime. See you next time on Our Daily Bread.